Thomas, how's it going, bud? Yeah, it's Congressman Wright. No, it's good to talk to you too. How you been? Good, good. Listen, I need to talk to you about something. I just got 2 new bills that slid across my desk this morning. It's the best thing I've seen in ages. Yeah, I need your support on them. Yeah? Alright, well let me tell you about them. The first thing, we got the National Currency Act of 1863. We're trying to get it in the next section of Congress. Yeah, this year. Well, we're going to do 2 things with it. The first thing, we're going to establish a United States dollar. It's going to be the national currency. It'll be the best thing since sliced bread. Yeah, no more of that state stuff. It's a mess. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to establish a federal charter for national banks. We'll have basically like a dual banking system. There'll still be some state banks, but there'll be federal banks that'll deal out our new federal currency. It'll be way better. Right now, my grandma can make a bank, my barber can make a bank. We don't want that to happen anymore. We need federal banks to have good regulations so that people keep their money. Yeah, Thomas? How do you feel about that? Good, that's what we'd like to hear. Oh, right, the second one, of course, yeah. So, we're calling it the National Bank Act of 1865. We're going to roll this out like 2 years later, yeah. But I want it on your radar now because it's important, like I said, greatest thing since sliced bread. What's it going to do? Well, we're going to increase the annual federal excise tax on state banknotes from 2% to 10%. That's going to get rid of all those state banks. No one's going to want to issue state notes anymore. When you're going to pay 10% on it, that's really going to discourage people from doing it. Yeah, exactly. State notes won't be used anymore. Right. You're glad we're on the same page. Listen, man, ever since the Michigan Act allowed automatic charting of banks, everything's been a mess. Yeah, all they have to do is fulfill reserve requirements and a few other things, and anyone can start a bank. Listen, in 1797, there were 24 chartered banks. Michigan Act happens, now there's 712. It's a nightmare out there. Yeah, listen, any bank can issue their own note, and as long as it's backed by gold or silver, it's fine. It meets the state regulations. It's ridiculous. And the fact of the matter is, most of those notes that are backed by gold and silver, they're not even backed by gold and silver. They're backed by like real estate notes or something like that. They can be backed by anything. Listen, Thomas, we all know that no banknote is worth its face value. Let's be honest, it just isn't. The discount depends purely on how stable the bank is and honestly how far away that bank is from you. If the bank's 30 miles away from me and I've never heard of it, I'm sure it's not help taking that note. Listen, just last year, my Uncle Jim, he wasn't even able to redeem his notes. Yeah, he couldn't find the bank. Most of these banks are located in the middle of nowhere. That way no one can redeem the notes. I know, it's ridiculous. We gotta do something about it. Thomas, listen to me, buddy. Anyone can get a note from these banks. But can you redeem them? No, you just can't. They're hard to find, they're backed by sketchy securities. It's just not gonna work. We really need these 2 bills. Come on, I need your support, buddy. That's what we like to hear. Alright, I'll see you in the next shortened session of Congress. Thanks, buddy. Have a good one.
How the fuck did you do that?
How does the world's richest man become the richest man in the world? For Rockefeller, it started with humble beginnings. He was born in 1839 in Richford, New York, but soon moved to a suburb of Cleveland. By the age of 31, he had founded Standard Oil. Not only did Standard Oil become America's largest oil refinery, but it also became America's most notorious monopoly. Rockefeller was only able to achieve this through his notoriously lethal business tactics. In order to become the most notorious monopoly in United States history, Rockefeller needed to capture nearly 100% of the market share. In order to do this, he had a playbook with a nearly 100% success rate. Whenever he wanted to move into a new market, he would simply get in contact with the local competition and offer to buy their businesses outright. He would offer fair market value, and a lot of people took him up on his offer, and these people usually got really rich. He would offer stock in his company, and that stock would increase in value as Standard Oil increased in value. And this is where things get good. Not everyone wanted to sell to Rockefeller, but he had a plan for that too. If someone didn't want to sell, he would simply set up an oil refinery in their market and run it at a loss. This would either force them to sell at a loss as well, and eventually they'd run out of money and go bankrupt. Or they'd be selling at a higher price and lose all of their market share. Now, I can tell you're not paying attention anymore. So, you really should only have one question. Is it all legal? Of course it is. Rockefeller gets a lot of heat for his brutal business tactics, but hey, at least the guy gave back. For Rockefeller, this may look like giving back to education. He believed that a person in his position owed a lot of his money to the public. Rockefeller first was a major contributor to the University of Chicago financially. He also was a large financial contributor to an African American women's college that later became Spelman University. Finally, he created the Rockefeller Institute of Medical Research, which focused on a lot of the diseases of the time. And this university is now called Rockefeller University.
During the post-Civil War era, the expansion of railroads were at rampant high. And one of the people that was helpful with that expansion was Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie Steel, which ended up taking over, one of the reasons Carnegie Steel was so dominant was its geographic location. Its primary mills were located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The mills itself were located close to a coal mine. Coal is one of the three main ingredients of steel. The Homestead Act tarnished Carnegie's reputation forever. And in 1902, he sold Carnegie Steel for around $500 million to J.P. Morgan, and it later on became U.S. Steel. Overall, Carnegie's success as a businessman came from his acceptance of new technology. The Bessemer and open hearth production processes allowed him to mass produce steel before anyone else when the U.S. needed it most. This, coupled with his ability to be a strategic businessman, made him an unstoppable force in the U.S. history. J.P. Morgan, the finance tycoon, was born in 1837 in Hartford, Connecticut. Okay. The boom of railroads had created such a large infrastructure that it was starting to get out of hand. In 1885, J.P. Morgan stepped in and helped broker and reconstruct a deal between Pennsylvania Railroad and New York Railroad, the two largest railroads in the country at the time. This restructuring of their deal helped dissipate tensions between the two massive competitors. This agreement helped made possible by J.P. Morgan to fuse tensions between these two powerhouses at a pivotal time in the United States. During the Panic of 1893, J.P. Morgan was able to step in again and help rehabilitate the Erie Railroad, Northern Pacific Railroad, and Southern Railroad companies, helping save the United States' infrastructure. In 1907, J.P. Morgan was there again with his own personal funds to help save the United States from crises. A frenzy of withdrawals caused by the public's distrust of the United States banking system at the time caused countless banks to close, and Wall Street bankers, along with J.P. Morgan, lent their own funds to help save the United States from crises. However, J.P. Morgan's financial heroism and constant ability to step in for the United States' financial system led many to understand that his financial power was probably too great. The Pujo Committee was created to investigate the Money Trust, a group of wealthy Wall Street bankers, including J.P. Morgan, who were believed to have too much financial power and influence over the United States. The findings of this committee spurred public support of the 16th Amendment that authorized federal income tax, the Federal Reserve Act, and the Clinton Antitrust Act.
Guys, guess what? Ramsey, your brother in the White House just increased the federal deposit insurance to $250K.
I've been working here for 5 months and Caleb still doesn't know that I'm not black.
Yeah, I mean, I had my money wrapped up in the real estate market. So in 2008, when it crashed, I had to look at my option. It was either move back in with my parents or start working at a place like this. So in 2008, when the financial institutions were selling subprime mortgages, labeled as AAA mortgages, since so many of them were defaulted, the people who bought the secondary mortgages went broke when all the subprimes went default. So essentially, AAA mortgages filled with shit ended up looking like they were gold.
doing?
Cut.
Hey Ramsey, I heard you hopped on the Robinhood train. Well, word on the street is GameStop is quite the buy nowadays.
Really?
That's what they say.
Alright. Caleb doesn't even know I have $500,000 in my Robinhood portfolio just over the last 6 months. Shout out to the democratization of finance.
Ramsey, could you send me those spreadsheets from last quarter?
You and this government always winning handouts.
What the heck are you talking about?
Or just like in 1913 when the Federal Reserve was created, one of their jobs was to be the lender of last resort. That means when banks were about to go in debt and default, they would just hand them out money so they wouldn't. The New Deal was a series of programs and projects instituted during the Great Depression by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The New Deal included programs like the SEC, Securities Acts of 1933 and 34, the Social Security Act, and the FDIC. On June 6, 1934, FDR signed the Securities Exchange Act, which created the SEC. It restored people's confidence in investing since it reduced deceitful trading, since it ensured the public received all important information about risks involved in an investment. To undertake such a big market, the SEC was divided into 5 divisions: the Division of Corporate Finance, the Division of Trading and Markets, the Division of Investment Management, and the Division of Enforcement, and finally the Division of Economic and Risk Analysis. Now we're going to talk about the Securities Act of 1933. Prior to the creation of the SEC, the Blue Sky laws were used to regulate security sales but were very ineffective. So in 1933, Congress passed the Securities Act, which required registration of most security sales in the United States. This prevented securities fraud and deceitful trading by ensuring that investors would receive truthful financial data about public securities for sale. This allowed the Federal Trade Commission to block security sales if they violated the act. Next comes the Social Security Act. It was a federal safety net for the elderly, unemployed, and disadvantaged Americans. It paid financial benefits to retirees over the age of 65 based on payroll tax contributions. Roosevelt had the idea in which people contributed to their own future economic security by contributing a portion of their work income through payroll tax deductions. Basically, the working generation would fund the retired generation's allowance. Finally, the FDIC was created in 1933 to ensure a level of trust in the American banking system. Due to the stock market crash in 1929, people withdrew their money from banks in a panic, which caused a wave of bank failures across the country. This was further heightened when Great Britain left the gold standard system and Americans converted their money into gold. In 1922, FDR signed into law the Banking Act of 1933, also referred to as the Glass-Steagall Act, which began to establish the FDIC. It ensured commercial bank deposits of $2,500, but it did not insure investment products such as stocks, bonds, or mutual funds. In 2011, Barack Obama signed the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, which permanently raised the FDIC deposit insurance limit to $250,000 per account. It also expanded the FDIC's responsibilities to include risk assessment of all FDIC-insured institutions.
All right, gentlemen, here's my plan. It has 3 parts. First, we're going to establish a national bank. This will provide a stable currency and provide a place for us to put American money once we raise taxes. Second, we're going to assume the state debts. As you guys know, during the Revolutionary War, all the states accumulated a lot of debt. So if we assume that debt, it'll really strengthen the allegiance that the states have to the federal government and provide a really strong foundation for national credit. The third and final thing we're going to do is we're going to protect our American enterprises by raising tariffs on anything that's imported. That way the American economy will be boosted because our local workers will be supported.
No, Hamilton. That's way too much federal power. The Constitution does not give us that power. Also, it serves the interests of the wealthy, and this is not what America should be.
Alright, Hamilton, Jefferson, I see both y'all's points. How we place the capital of our country in the South in exchange for the federal government assuming state debts.
That sounds agreeable to me.
Alright.
Now that we've reached a compromise, I'm going to use the power given by the necessary and proper clause of the Constitution to create the first national bank. It would be a fractional reserve bank where 80% is owned by private investors and 20% will be owned by the federal government. We're going to initially raise $10 million in capital. The federal government, under this clause, will also be given the power to print its own currency. Unfortunately, in 1811, Congress let the charter for my first national bank expire. This caused the economy to really crash and inflation skyrocketed. In 1819, the second national bank was established to try to help control this inflation, but unfortunately it was too late.
Andrew Jackson strongly opposed the National Bank, the head of which was Nicholas Biddle at the time. He believed that it only hurt commerce and would only benefit the elite. He passed an order called Specie Circular to combat inflation, where people buying federal land could pay in gold and silver, which caused banknotes to lose value and led to the Panic of 1837. He vetoed the renewal of the second bank's charter and killed the second bank by withdrawing money from it and placing it into pet banks, state banks that are in his favor. So the biggest takeaways from the founding era are Hamilton's ideology prevailed and it laid the groundwork for the American economy. Secondly, fractional reserve banking is inherently risky, and we see the beginning of frequently occurring panics.
Progressive era can be very difficult to understand. From business regulations, social welfare, and trust busting, things can get pretty confusing. I could explain it to you, but I feel like Thomas Moriarty, the sworn enemy of Holmes, could do a better job in a hot tub.
These horrid working conditions were being exposed by muckrakers like Theodore Dreiser, who wrote The Financier and Titan. Now we have the antitrust acts, breaking up big businesses like the tobacco companies and Standard Oil, such as the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. So the Clayton Antitrust Act, after the Sherman Antitrust Act passed in 1890, actually further strengthened the Sherman Antitrust Act by allowing unions not to be prosecuted as trusts. Then comes along the Federal Trading Commission, which discouraged and investigated acts of unfair trading, except in the banking and transportation industries. Now you're probably wondering about the Child Labor Act of 1916, which strictly prohibited the interstate sale of anything made by a 14-year-old or under, and put a cap on how many hours a child could work in the United States per week. Then along comes the Federal Trading Commission, which discouraged acts of unfair trading and business practices, except in transportation and banking. Another thing to note was the rise of the civil rights movement, W. Boys and Booker T. Washington fighting for equality for people of color. The biggest takeaway from the Berg-Artsov era is the fact that the reaction of the government to the haves and have-nots was growing so much that it was tearing America apart. It put a cap on what big business could do and started getting regulation in places that we had never seen before. Alright, now get out of here.